Hi, good afternoon everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. Really looking forward to getting started. So first of all, just a couple of introductions. Today, I'll be leading the webinar. My name's Tom, I head up product sales here at Intechnica. I've been working with Intechnica over the past 5 years, helping a lot of major retailers through a lot of big events all around the globe. Fortunate enough today to be joined by James Billingham. James is one of our leading performance architects. James, are you there?
Yep, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Fantastic. Don't know if you can give a little bit of introduction on yourself there, James.
Yeah, so I have a long history with IBM, worked there for 10 years as J2E developer, architect, and moving into the performance group in IBM Labs. Subsequently worked in the gaming industry for a while as performance architect, and now for 3 years with Intechnica, working with clients on their performance problems.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, James. So just before we get started today, guys, we will be doing a Q&A panel at the end. So if anyone does have any questions at any point, please do feel free to fill those in on the side panel on the right-hand side. More than welcome to cover any of those questions you have at the end of the session, be it questions on getting ready for big events, questions about the research you've seen, or anything else in between. So do please, if you do have any questions, do please submit them through that question box so we can get them covered at the end. In terms of what we're going to do as a session today, I'm just going to give you a little background on ourselves and what Intechnica does, why we're interested in this space, why we gather this kind of research. Then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on Black Friday specifically, so the sales phenomenon that we've been seeing in the UK since 2010 and wider afield for those of us that are from outside of the UK on the webinar. Going to be covering some stats and some interesting findings on that. Before we go into our research, we're going to be looking at 3 kind of pieces of research. One is our Black Friday sort of research report that we publish on a yearly basis at the end of the piece, at the end of the sales season. We've got another piece of research we've gathered from working with 20 leading retailers across the globe, helping them to get ready. And then the main bulk of the research today is going to come from James's findings, which is monitoring the top 100 retailers in the UK and giving you some insight into what we found there from monitoring people sort of pre and during Black Friday peak season last year to where those retailers are at now. So we're going to be going through all of that. Before giving some recommendations from the research that we found, and also touch wood some predictions that we hope are going to be right about what we're expecting to see this year. There's quite a lot of stuff to cover, a lot of research in there for everyone, and I expect it's going to take us roughly around about 30 to 45 minutes to get through all of that, leaving us plenty of time for some Q&A at the end, and hopefully getting you all off for an early finish is the plan. So in terms of just getting started about Intechnica, I think it's just important just to set a little bit of the scene of what we do and why we're interested in this. Intechnica was founded in 2006 by our CTO and CEO, currently still in the business. They built the Glastonbury ticketing website many years ago, getting on for 10 years ago now. And they built that website and it ran fine year in, year out, selling tickets for one of the UK's largest festivals. Until the point at which Glastonbury themselves decided they wanted to push everyone to purchasing tickets online. They put £1 million worth of investment into advertising the online sales push, but unfortunately at the time, they only gave our CTO and CEO sort of a week's worth of notice and to prepare. What they found at the time was there wasn't really many people out there that could help. There wasn't really any systems or any experts who could help them. Certainly not within the short notice they had to get ready for the event. What followed was a really large outage. So 52 hours sort of a site down. A telephone exchange was taken out, and a really sort of long sleepless night for our co-founders there. It was such a public outage that people decided to print the error message on a t-shirt and sell them at the festival. So we can literally say we've been there, we've done that, and we've been through the whole piece of experiencing a massive outage as a business. Off the back of that, our co-founders redesigned, redeveloped, and replatformed the ticketing engine there, and the following year it sold out in record time. So that was the history, and then Intechnica was founded off the back of that in 2006 with a view to helping businesses optimize and tune their systems, make them more performant, more scalable. We work with, obviously today we're focusing on retail, but we've got a lot of experience working in industries such as gaming, rentals, pharmaceuticals, all around the globe. It didn't really matter to us what business people are in. It's more about the people we work with care about performance, they care about customer experience, they want to make their sites faster and or more scalable. So that's what we do as a business. I think one of the key pieces of our thinking and our thinking moving forward, both in services and as a product, is that traffic is an asset to any business, particularly if you're in retail, because you can monetize this traffic. But it's really important that people have the right systems in place and the right understanding of the traffic they're receiving as a business, visibility into what that traffic looks like and what it's doing, and then have the correct sort of processes in place to be able to manage it correctly. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have visibility or control over your traffic, it's going to really impact your bottom line, particularly more and more as everything moves online. So, James, I think you've got a couple of further thoughts on that kind of piece of traffic being really essential to a business as an asset.
Yeah, sure. So I've got a couple of slides here, characteristics of a successful optimization and of an unsuccessful one. So primarily, we work with people, consulting them on how to manage their performance processes end to end, and performance of your site, investments that you make should always be linked to business outcome, ideally. You should be able to measure the effect of any investment you make in performance on conversion rate and engagement. And ideally, you should be able to build a business case for a performance investment. It makes your life easier and our life easier, and certainly sending it up to people higher up in the business or why they should invest in something. It makes sense to better do that, to better measure it, and better prove it at the end. So even if you're just doing a very quick performance optimization in preparation for Black Friday, having some measurement in place, if it's just basic real user monitoring of your back end, you need to have that there to be able to understand what happened and to work on performance, to better improve performance, and if things go wrong, to better diagnose them. So baking optimization into your processes, one-off optimization process or engagement is good, but actually doing it as a BAU is the ideal, is what we'd say. So characteristics of a failed optimization. So just a few anecdotes from some of the research we've done last year and looking at pages now. Poor design decisions for the front end, release procedures that lead to performance bugs. Last year, I think we had somebody had a very small image that somehow managed to be multiple megabytes in size, obviously some sort of content management snafu, but that's fair enough. Things go into production, things go wrong, but for it to be there for the whole of the period of Black Friday, the whole week, is not acceptable, because you should be having processes, should be having alerting there to warn you when something gets into production that shouldn't be in there. Same thing for heavy design. We understand a lot of people have very feature-rich websites, lots of images, highly rich images, but certainly one of the ones I looked at this year, trying to understand why the fully loaded page size, which I'll go through, was so vast. It's because below the fold, there were a whole load of images being loaded over XHR requests, so asynchronously, which is good. That's a best practice, but it was below the fold and it loaded it constantly, regardless of whether you actually scrolled down or not. All coming out of CloudFront and probably costing quite a lot of money if you got a lot of traffic and a lot of people looking at it. So finally, no measurement in place means no alerting when bugs get into production. So, another one last year, there was a mobile optimized site where obviously there's a MP4 on the desktop, which is only 1 megabyte. The content management system intelligently decided to convert that into a GIF, probably to support various mobile devices. But the GIF was 35 megabytes and the MP4 was 1 megabyte, so giving people on mobile a horrendous experience. Again, when that stays there for, I think that particular one for weeks, it's indicative that performance optimization isn't baked into your culture. You haven't got processes and people in place that are looking at it and actually working on this day to day. So certainly that's our number one, is this should be part of your process, part of your culture, rather than necessarily something you do as a one-off exercise, even if it is Black Friday coming up and you probably are doing one-off exercises.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, James. So yeah, essentially what we're seeing as a business is that traffic is becoming more and more important to online businesses. As every sort of sale is driven online, that digital traffic is an asset. It's really key to get on top of that. And so what we really want to do now is just focus on to Black Friday. 72 days and 9 hours, maybe just a little bit less now we're getting into the webinar away. Really big period for everyone involved, and I think it's just interesting to note, There's a really interesting piece of research published by Cisco at the start of the year, essentially showing that generally average internet traffic as a whole was growing at sort of 32% year on year and expected to continue to grow at that rate until 2021. But what was even more interesting for us was that there was actually a 51% growth in peak hour traffic. So what sort of the guys at Cisco did and what they found is really that, internet traffic is definitely growing as a whole, but really interestingly, peak time traffic is growing even bigger and even faster than general internet traffic. So that's as an industry as a whole. As we look to actually Black Friday and stats last year for retailers, some really interesting stats here. And what we effectively saw, £1.23 billion in sales spent in 24 hours in the UK, an increase in online traffic by 220%, sales increased 12%, and really interestingly, this was sort of another fact we dug out, 1.2 million apps installed on that day, so we can really see a growth in sort of the amount of retailers driving sales through their apps, pushing customers to their apps on their busiest sort of selling days. So yeah, we've seen a lot of increase in sort of app sales, mobile sales, of course, and I think what we're also seeing with that increase in apps installed is also an increase in push notifications to customers, trying to drive and spin up interest. I think what's really interesting for us, we did a piece of research around how well are retailers prepared. So we worked with 20 retailers last year in the run-up to peak. Around 50% of those retailers, once we'd done the kind of preparation workshops with them, sort of agreed that they was not fully prepared. And I think what we saw this lead to, not necessarily in the retailers we work with, but The Guardian last year published an article exposing 15 of the UK's major retail sites as suffering from outages. So despite Black Friday having sort of arisen back in 2010 and really sort of getting bigger and bigger and bigger in the UK, we still are seeing quite some really big familiar brand names suffering from outages. So really interesting sort of to see those big brands suffer from outages there. Especially given that the growth hasn't been as big as it was. So only a 12% growth. We did some further research just to look at this. One of the pieces we're doing here is we were tracking outages across every industry around the world. And what we found was that 34% of all of the outages we saw across the retail industry globally were actually driven by Black Friday sales. So a really big culprit of the issues that we are seeing in the retail industry globally. Further to that, we did another piece of research just asking kind of what was the general growth in traffic people saw on their normal kind of busy shopping day, with the majority of respondents responding to say that, typically they were expecting a 10% uplift on their, a 10 times uplift, on their busiest day, with other correspondents reporting up to 100 times uplift on their busiest day. So a really big, really important day for everyone involved in retail. We did a piece of research which is actually downloadable where we monitored the top 100 sites over the busy shopping period, and some analysis found from last year, typically on average, an average UK retailer can expect, the average sort of cost of a downtime to be sort of £57,000 per hour, with that equating to sort of some £1.3 million across the day. So certainly something to be aware of there. I'm going to now pass over to James just after that bit of background to discuss in a little bit more detail the research we've carried out, particularly for this webinar in preparation for the Christmas trading period we've got coming up.
Thanks. So before we start going into charts and things, just go over the methodology. So we've done this last Black Friday for the first time. Prior to that, we did a much more subjective set of measurements. So now we've got a reproducible method of downloading, simulating loading the sites, both mobile and desktop, across 3 different locations in AWS, Amazon Web Services. So we're doing synthetic monitoring from 3 different locations, and we are looking at home pages. So you probably have either looked at or know about synthetic monitoring. It's certainly something worth sort of using for monitoring your own performance. And if you're doing that, you wouldn't just look at one page like we are. You'd look at a journey, but it's not really feasible for us over 400 plus retailers to do a full journey and monitor that. So we're just looking at the home page, the store window, as it were, and drawing some conclusions from that rather than the whole thing. So when we actually monitor it over Black Friday, we look at outages, slowdowns, things like that. That isn't included here because we've been looking at it over the last over a period of a week when it's not peak, when there weren't any major outages, there shouldn't be any, or slowdowns. So here we're just looking at the what are the size of the pages, how are they optimized versus last Black Friday. And what we'll do when we come around to this Black Friday is do the same sort of monitoring and produce a webinar and a report on who went down and anonymized on how many retailers went down, how many slowed down, and how that compared to the previous Black Friday. So the information we've got here, so first of all, if we go back to the previous chart, the sort of the main element that most people probably performance test for and look at is back-end server performance, and that realizes itself as time to first byte. Looking at front-end performance is all of the elements that make up the web page. The bit that your servers are mainly doing is the time to first byte, the rendering of the initial HTML page. So if people are doing preparation and just looking at the back-end performance, they're missing out a large amount in terms of the user experience, because best practice from web page tests and other people will usually flag you if you're above 400 milliseconds. This is the full range of time to first bytes for all of the retailers we looked at, and most are under a second, with some absolutely egregious ones there going up to 6 seconds, which is very, very, very poor, because that is basically the initial HTML has taken 6 seconds to come in. All of the elements have to come in after that. It has to render. So you're certainly looking at 20, 30 seconds minimum for page load there. It shouldn't really contribute much to load time. And again, we've seen some extreme here, but it really is something that's more the absolute bare basic minimum you should be monitoring rather than anything else, and there's a whole lot more to performance than just the back end time. So if we move on. So the size of pages, we've got desktop and mobile pages here. So this is on the on-load event, how many megabytes have actually been loaded, ideally not megabytes, so how many kilobytes have been loaded. So there's a massive range of values here, and again, we pointed this out in previous reports. In terms of competitive advantage, there's a lot to be had here. A lot of people are up in the top 25th percentile. The people right down the bottom, the best ones, Amazon will be right down there, being sub megabyte size, and also having the fastest page load speed as well. Right to the worst in these, which are like 18 megabytes, or actually the 20 megabyte one there was actually the mobile, which is even worse than it would be on the desktop page. Typically you'd be downloading that over 4G or 3G if you're very unlucky, and it would take a very long time to come down. So median value on desktop and median values on mobile, very little change, maybe slightly worse on desktop. So not really a lot of change from when we looked at this on Black Friday last year. Be interesting to see when we come around to actual Black Friday, when people have spent a lot of time optimizing their sites, whether there's actually a move to be better rather than worse, which was in a very slight move on desktop there. But it's important to note that the size of your page and the time to load are directly correlated. Unless you've got some very bad third-party tags, etc., you will see the time your page download is directly related to the size of your page. A very good rule of thumb. So really, there's no significant change over last Black Friday there, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. So moving forward. So one of the things we're looking at here, I was giving you the metric of on-load. There are a number of, if you've looked into this at all, you'll know when a page is presented to the user, there are a number of different values that you can look at. There's DOM ready, there's on load, there's fully loaded. All of these have different uses. Certainly some people we've worked with, and they're using real user measurement, will maybe even put in a custom tag so that they can mark the point that everything above the fold is loaded on the page. So the point that the customer sees all of the relevant elements on the page. Really, there's no one metric that will give you everything that you need. It's important to look at all the different page load aspects to see if your customers are having any sort of issues. And one obvious way to demonstrate that is looking at this and fully loaded versus on load. Fully loaded is, the page will stop, a little spinner on your browser will stop going. It'll appear the page is loaded, but fully loaded, there's actually some more asynchronous elements being loaded in the background. So it's certainly best practice to load things below the fold via asynchronous load, because you want to show to the person looking at the website that things are loaded as quickly as possible to improve user experience. But here, we've got some absolute extreme maximums, 52 megabytes, 38 megabytes. Actually, the 52 one, it actually carried on to load over 100 megabytes. If you left it, that was one in the anecdote I gave earlier. It was loading lots of MP4s in the background via XHR to into a frame that's actually below the fold. So unless you scroll down, you wouldn't see any of them. So these very large downloads are going to be especially problematic on mobile. Hammering people's data allowance, if nothing else, is certainly not going to give them a great user experience. So moving to async loading is a good idea, but ideally, if it's below the fold, make sure it's loaded. It's triggered on them scrolling down and actually viewing the element that you're loading asynchronously. I just wanted to make the point there are multiple measurements you can make when you're looking at synthetic measurements. So if we move down.
Yeah, and I think this one's back over to me, James, here. So James has just sort of given the first kind of piece of research into what did we see as a very quick high-level look at people's sort of page weight, page size, and things like that. We're about to move on to loading time, but just before we do, I thought it's important just to demonstrate some of the information we have in terms of why page load is important, why it's important to make your user journey as fast as possible for your customers. There's a lot of stats out there, and I know there's a lot of you guys on this webinar because you're very keen on web performance, so probably just preaching to the converted already here, but obviously, we're seeing that 79% of customers are less likely to purchase from a slow performing site. 64% of customers are expecting that a mobile site loads within sort of under 4 seconds. And really interestingly, pretty general stat there, but a 1 second delay can quite often cause around about a 7% decrease in conversion. So really important stats there. There's loads of these stats out there. Imagine lots of people have read these. What we wanted to do is to back that up with a little bit of work we've done with one of the UK's, potentially the UK's largest retailer, certainly one of the top 10. And we worked with this customer for a long period of time, and we noticed that they had a sort of real range of slowdowns over the period of a year. And what we did was we looked at sort of the average slowdown, how when the site gets busy, how often does it slow down, what's the average time of that slowdown, how many of the customers are affected by this, what's that impact on conversion, and then what's that impact on basket size. So we worked this out over a sort of period of year, and I think the figure was pretty startling to us when we came to it. But effectively, what we demonstrated pretty conclusively was that the effect of slowdowns for this business, so that was one of the UK's biggest, and having sort of multiple sales per year, they were certainly being impacted to the tune of £3.36 million a year because of those slowdowns. So it obviously is very, very important to, I think we've done a lot of talking in the past about how important it is to keep your site up and available, but I think more and more it's becoming important to make sure that your website is also fast and available and that customers are getting the best experience, because what we're seeing is that customers just won't tolerate that, and their tolerance is certainly going down. So yeah, hopefully that sets the scene a little bit for your part now, James, where you can talk a little bit more about load time.
Yeah, so I mean, exactly. Talking about less than 4 seconds there certainly aren't very many. On load there, off to the right on the right-hand chart is mobile, and 5 seconds is obviously drops off there, but there aren't many retailers in our 400 that are in our measurements that are getting less than 5 seconds. It's worth bearing in mind that our measurements are done in the data center, AWS. It's a very fast connection, so if anything, this is best case. Any of these people are using CloudFront, because obviously we test in AWS. It's always useful to understand the limitations of your synthetic testing. They also will be getting an extra benefit from our synthetic testing here and be blazingly fast, but still there aren't many loading faster than 4 seconds there. Certainly the big people that we know about performance, like Amazon, are certainly in that little tail at the end there, a few seconds, and some of the people that obviously focus on performance a lot there. But the vast majority of people are between this, 15 and 5 second range, with a small group who are pretty bad, people with very large images on their sites, egregious, obviously, performance bugs rather than by design, going up to 35 seconds there. So yeah, I mean, it's very important to understand this, and the figures are a slight decrease in time since Black Friday. It'd be interesting again to see what the actual Black Friday ones are. We've seen certainly big increases in take-up of HTTP2 and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see whether there is actually overall in our top 400 an overall improvement in the median, or whether those people who are definitely not focusing on performance carry on dragging down the values there. So moving on. So again, fully loaded. Again, a massive impact on the time here. So this is certainly on mobile. The device is actually doing a lot of work at this point. It can actually, it's worth, when you're doing synthetic measurement, looking at the CPU usage on the device. So the one on the right there is 120 seconds. Both of them are timeouts, but that's a mobile measurement. And we saw a couple of things here. One, there was the XHR of loading assets over and over. That actually hammers the CPU on the device. And again, there's an error in Google Analytics for another one that timed out and was actually constantly loading things way past the timeout. And again, that is having an impact on the device performance. Desktop, you might not see that being such an issue. It's not going to saturate the CPU of a desktop device, a modern desktop device, but certainly handheld devices where, if you've got things going on in the background and people trying to scroll down and browse through your site, they could well be getting a horrendous experience when you actually think you've done some clever optimization and moved things to be asynchronous, and actually you're causing some serious usability problems with a mobile device. So moving on from that one. So a couple of things we look at, just the absolute bare basic minimum things you can do, things that are most simplest optimizations possible, one of which is gzip, compressing the transfer of assets, and it constantly amazes me that you actually see any significant savings here, because going way back when I first started at IBM, it was turning on gzip was a new thing then, as now it's should be absolutely completely common and everybody should be doing it, but seemingly they're not, and actually some people get some vast savings of multiple megabytes just from turning on gzip. Again, it'd be interesting to see HTTP2 comes out. I'm calling it gzip savings here. Actually, HTTP2 uses custom compression, compresses the headers and the body. And this time it was interesting to see that before Black Friday, 30% of all of the requests that we monitored a few million for this particular one, were HTTP2, whereas previously Black Friday, last time, it was 11%. So that's a big increase in HTTP2. I was quite surprised not to see an increase or improvement in the loading speed overall. But again, it'd be interesting to see when actually Black Friday comes around how many more people have managed to move either their CDNs or their core site onto HTTP2, and this becomes less and less of an issue, as it should be. So moving on as well, the gzip savings, there's image savings. And again, this one's perhaps more understandable, with modern content management systems. It's quite difficult to know what images are being published onto your site. You don't necessarily get handle them in source control necessarily the same way. We have worked with people that, as part of their build pipeline, they do some testing, they run some automated tools that will actually tell you whether your images are optimized or not, and have that as a fail in the build if something's got in there that is not optimized. But one of these people here, certainly, they're obviously the same website on mobile and desktop, 7.5 megabytes of poorly optimized images. Basically, the images should look, to most people, absolutely identical, but that's 7.5 megabytes of wasted bandwidth, basically. There is a caveat here, lossless is subjective. I recommend, if you're really interested in this, you can go and have a look at Etsy. Actually created their own application so that people internally could rank whether an image was at a certain level of optimization on a particular device was actually lossless to their eyes or not. So there is a lot to be done there, but certainly for the vast majority of people, just running it through a fairly bog standard image optimization tool on a fairly generous setting will actually give you a lot of image savings and a lot of page speed savings as well. So moving on to the actual percentage of the page size that could be saved, joining those two up. And again, bear in mind this is the absolute bare minimum of optimization. It doesn't include third-party tags or anything else. Those outliers get absolutely massive savings. 98%, I think the person with 7.5 megabytes of unoptimized images on there, the vast majority of their page was just unoptimized images and nothing else. They can get that is a massive improvement then in page load times as well. There's a direct correlation between the size of your pages and the page load time, which, as Tom's nicely pointed out there, is directly related to the amount of money you can make. You'll be putting people off. People won't be buying from you, certainly when it's a sale sort of scenario, and if there are competitors they can go to, then they will go to them. So, none of this is accounted for third-party tags or any more complex optimizations. If we're involved in working with people on optimizing their site, we'll look at it from an end-to-end point of view, the back-end performance, front-end performance, and this is, the absolute bare minimum, and there are significant savings to be had, so it's worth thinking about. So, moving on. So yeah.
James, I was just going to say, before we move into recommendations, we are going to be doing a Q&A session in the next 10 minutes. So if anyone does have any questions, if they want to submit them, perhaps they might have some after your recommendations. But yeah, if anyone's got any more questions, please feel free to add them to the list, submit them through the panel in the bottom of your webinar, and we'll get through to them at the end. Sorry, James.
Cool, no problem. All right, so moving on to recommendations from this. So how do you get ready for Black Friday? One of the main things we've spoken about, and Tom's spoken about there, you had some interesting statistics about conversion and speed. Certainly if you're not sold on that, I recommend you look at that link down the bottom there, which is a Faster FD and FT's blog. They proved conclusively that for their website, if they slowed down the site by a certain number of seconds, it would definitely impact conversion by that percentage. And the way they did it rather bravely was by purposely slowing down the site. So usually when you do this with real user monitoring, you'll pick out sessions where people got bad performance because of bad network connectivity or a particular device or something like that is slow. It's always dubious to know whether the reason they didn't convert is because it was slow or because maybe their device didn't support all of the features of the site, something like that. So it might look like it's performance that's causing the drop in conversion, but actually it might not be. Whereas this conclusively proved that it was actual speed, because it's across all devices. They actually slowed down the site on purpose and measured what their conversion was. And they're able to put out an actual pound value onto a second of performance, and that is a very powerful thing to be able to do when you're looking at investing in performance and what people you should have, what tools you should have. If you can actually do that, then that is a very useful tool. But we'd say minimum you should be able to measure success. So if you're doing some optimization for Black Friday, you definitely need to review your monitoring and make sure you're able to look at what was the impact of that before Black Friday comes around. Ideally, you're going to put these changes in live before Black Friday. Actually measure it and look at it. You're potentially doing a lot of changes that should improve performance, but you want to make sure that your actual users do actually experience better performance. Quite often we see that people will put changes in and it actually can damage the user experience or change the user experience in unexpected ways that don't actually lead to more conversion or better outcomes. So that's our number one recommendation. So moving on, an example of that is looking at mobile sites. A lot of people ask in these webinars, should we have an optimized mobile site? What I've got there, the 31% figure, isn't necessarily people who've got, like I said, for example, a responsive site, a site that renders differently for a mobile device. What I've done here is looked at pages that are actually significantly smaller. They are actually different for the mobile site and they are optimized for the mobile site as well. And only 31% of the 400 we've looked at have actually got significantly different and smaller page size, page load for mobile. So we certainly work with a lot of people that see problems with conversion on mobile, and it can help with that. But again, what you need to be able to do is actually prove that it's a significant investment to have a mobile optimized site quite often, so not one that's just responsive and the same content but rendered differently. So definitely you want to be able to prove and demonstrate that that is actually having an effect on conversion, understand what your conversion or business outcomes are from actually having that mobile optimized site. So moving on to the last slide. So mainly it's monitor, measure and report, have automated checks for all of these things. Certainly the bare minimum stuff that we've mentioned here in the time we've got available, but certainly there's a whole lot more that you can go into and specific things for your website. So actually having visibility of performance and having these things up on dashboards ideally, getting the developers involved and actually developers actually seeing part of a DevOps type culture how performance is being affected, how performance is affecting the business. It actually breeds a performance culture in the organization. we work with a number of people to help them do that in their organisation, and that can have big benefits in terms of performance, but ongoing performance, not just sort of one-off exercises where you optimize and then don't look at it again for the rest of the year. It's an ongoing thing that actually gives you a business benefit over some of your competitors, ideally. So certainly real user monitoring as part of that strategy, get information on what the user experience is. So people work with people who spend a vast amount of money on performance testing, and all they do is monitor the CPU usage of their back-end servers. That time to first byte is 400 milliseconds, whereas most people are experiencing the user experience is 5 seconds, 15 seconds. That 400 milliseconds of time to first byte isn't a lot, and if you're spending all your performance engineering effort there, then you're probably you're missing out on a lot. So synthetic monitoring, like this report uses, but more comprehensive, as is definitely designed to be reproducible and to have a large breadth and be able to compare people across the market and their competitors. But if you're doing it, you should be doing it. User journeys, you should be monitoring. You should be monitoring across different devices, ideally real devices if you can. If that's mobile is a key part of your business, different locations, different network conditions. So certainly synthetic monitoring is very important. You actually have control of all of the parameters there, and it's reproducible. So it's very important to have synthetic monitoring to actually understand performance of your site. Away and above this is obviously focused on front-end performance, this research and the presentation, but obviously understanding your limits, load testing, where will the website break? While I say, if you do all your performance engineering on the back end, you're only improving user experience by less than a second for time to first byte. Actually, if the site goes down, if it gets saturated, it can't handle the load, then nobody gets any user experience at all. So you really need to understand where your site will break, what the limits are. And obviously Intechnica's got Product Traffic Defender, which sits in front of your site for peaks. As part of the stuff that Tom was talking about with Glastonbury, etc., came out of that. That can actually sit there. You can handle 10,000 concurrent users. Traffic Defender can make sure that 10,001 or 12,000, the 2,000 of those, they're actually put into a fair and transparent queue, and they don't actually impact the performance of the other 10,000. So the vast majority of your website visitors get a good experience, and not everybody gets a terrible experience. The final thing, again, automated traffic. We do some stuff with bot control. We've got a product again called Bot Defender. We find that most of the people we work with, about typically 30% of their traffic at peak can be made up of automated traffic. Some of that you want, some of that you don't want. Some of it can be malicious. Certainly, obviously, that can make the difference between actually being up and down at peak, which again can be a large difference of a vast amount of money if it happens in a high-profile event like Black Friday. So you really need to understand your traffic and control it. Is the message we're getting across here. But overall, we've got another webinar coming up, I think Tom will talk about, which is surviving spikes. And in Intechnica, we do a lot of consultation with people on how to manage performance engineering end-to-end in an organisation. There's not enough time to go into all of that now, so this is just a few top tips for that. And over to Tom.
Oh, yeah, thanks a lot for that, James. Just on mute there. Yes, we are moving into the Q&A very shortly, so we've got a couple of questions to answer. If anyone does have any more questions, please do chuck them in. We'll get to them. I think just ahead of that, one thing we wanted to do, maybe a bit of fun, maybe I won't find it so fun in January when we come back to it, but we wanted to just, based on the research, and I work with a lot of retailers, do a couple of predictions ahead of the upcoming Black Friday. I think, first of all, one of the main changes are, a lot of people were saying our business is going to take part. There's obviously businesses that are now taking a stance that they don't want to take part. We've seen some really interesting stuff. People like Jigsaw actually driving spikes out of the fact that they don't take part and advertising the fact that they don't do kind of deals during the deal period. They have a really interesting stance on it. But generally, we expect a lot of the major players to be very, very invested in Black Friday this year. We've seen since, literally the day after Black Friday 2016, some of the industry leaders, the big players such as Best Buy, Currys, all creating Black Friday pages straight away to start building up that rank for this year. So we expect a lot of people to be taking Black Friday very, very seriously this year. It's definitely becoming more and more a part of the strategic landscape for the selling year for a retailer. We definitely haven't spoken to a few people. I don't know about the people on the line. We expect retailers to continue this trend of extending Black Friday. So obviously here in the UK, Cyber Monday has always been a very large day for a lot of retailers. We're expecting, last year we started to see people do deal weeks. I expect that we'll see that stretch out even further based on the conversations I've had with a lot of people, that people looking at doing possibly month-long sales, 3-week-long sales, sales focused on weeks around different product lines. Certainly a lot of extension of the sale period we're expecting to happen. I think one thing to be aware of, we have, James alluded to it and talked about the growth of sort of automated traffic. One piece of automated traffic we are seeing is price checking software, basically people tracking pricing much more closely. I think, we started to see this earlier on last year and a lot of businesses get burnt. We're going to see a lot in the press about the validity of discounts, i.e., I think retailers are moving away from being able to just say that, we've discounted it by 10% when potentially 3 months ago it was on sale for, a 15% discount. So certainly want to watch with your pricing. Be aware that there are tools out there and there are press looking to catch people out on discounts. So we're certainly going to have to see an increase in sort of the true real sales if brands don't want to damage their reputation in the press. I also expect we'll see less outages, pretty bold claim, but I reckon just due to the spreading out of the sale, we will see less outages as a whole. I think we'll certainly still see some major outages because they just do come, and we'll certainly see a lot of slowdowns, but I reckon as a whole, due to the spreading out of the sale, we'll see less outages. And I think finally, everyone's predicting it, pretty obvious one here, but I reckon we'll see a further increase in mobile sales further to last year. So a couple of predictions there. I think interestingly, we'll be running this session again in the new year, so just at the back end of Black Friday and in the new year to show what we actually found through monitoring all of the sites through the actual peak season. We'll pull up these predictions there to see how accurate we got them, because I think that'll just be interesting, and also to see if there are any changes. So yeah, one other piece of research to be aware of, we will be rerunning where people are. We'll be doing that just after Black Friday at the start of the sort of new year. Other things we've got coming up, if anyone does need any sort of help, we are going to be having another session called Surviving Spikes, which is mainly focused not on the data, but the process of how you can get ready for a big event. What are the key steps we encourage customers to take to get ready? What are the key, easy, quick wins you can do to get ready? So we'll be covering that in another session called Surviving Spikes that we'll be advertising very shortly. We're also going to be doing some customer sort of sessions where we're going to have some customers go live and discuss some of the things they've done, the wins they've had and how they've prepared for peak. We're going to be doing those interesting sessions. For those of you that have seen this data, if you want to understand where you sit in those sites that James monitored, we're more than happy to do a private session with anyone on this webinar, or indeed any customers sort of catching up on this on the recording. If you want to understand where your site sits specifically in the panel that we monitored, are you above the mean, are you below the mean, are you one of the fastest or are you one of the slowest, and there's potentially some quick wins, do get in touch. We can book that assessment. You can book it straight in online, and we'll be in touch to sort of schedule that with you and show you where you actually sit if that is something you want to find out. But yeah, that's enough from me. What I want to do now is just quickly move to the Q&A. We've got a couple of questions lined up. If anyone, like I said, if anyone has any more, please do submit them. The first question coming from Bill. James, Bill was just asking, sort of, how did we monitor the sites? How many sites did we monitor? How did we choose that sort of group, and how big was it?
Well, yeah, I believe the group was chosen by yourselves, wasn't it, as the top retail sites in the UK. So you can probably talk about that a bit more detail. But in terms of technically how it was monitored, we monitored the home pages and we used our own customized instance of web page test. So we've got that set up so that we can run exactly the same test across the same locations each year for a long period of time, ingest all the data into Elasticsearch, and then manipulate it and visualize it however we want. So it'll certainly be interesting this next Black Friday of how we compare that data to the previous one. We can do all sorts of things like looking at CDN use, any millions of different metrics that you get out of this data. So yeah, if there's any things that people want to see out of that, then let us know, or any other further insight into how pages perform or across different retailers, then certainly feed that into us. And again, the same for the private reviews of where you sit in that data as well. We can obviously talk about anything particularly you have interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in terms of the selection criteria for that, what we did was we just looked at the top 100 retailers that we could list using a variety of sources. So we're certainly covering the biggest revenue generating sites, the top sort of known ones, and then the tail end as well of all the sort of top retailers in the UK, looking at lists like Internet Retailing, Times, TechTrack, and Experian data as well. So we create a sort of pretty comprehensive list of all of the top retailers. So pretty sure most of you guys will rank in that, and more than happy to show you that data of where you sit. Just on to the next question. Thanks for that answer, James. But the next question, coming in from Ian, can you give an example of bots making up a large percentage of traffic? Absolutely. I think this is one thing to watch for a lot of people. It can be a quite quick win. We've seen people enable sort of blocking mitigation software that's enabled them to reduce their traffic by 10% at peak time, which can have a big impact if you can up your capacity by 10%. Typical sort of things generating this, we saw last year one to watch out for. Bing went a little bit wild in the run-up to sort of the peak season, and it scraped a lot of retailer sites very heavily. So that's one you can try and keep control of by going in their console. We're also seeing a rise of shop bots. So I spoke to a retailer just yesterday who'd put a lot of items on a very, very big sale, and people were starting to use automated traffic to purchase those items so they can get the big deals and then resell them on things like eBay. So you've got a range of automated traffic, there's malicious traffic, scrapers, and also, obviously, given it's a day about offers, we're expecting to see an increase in the amount of competitors using automated software to track your pricing and try and compete with you on that foot. So that's certainly one to watch out for. The sort of next question coming in, Sophie wanted to ask James, what would be your sort of top thing to look at in terms of if there was a quick win? So what's the number one quick win we'd recommend we normally see for people?
Yeah, I mean, as well, I put those two very simple ones in there. As I say, the GZIP and the images. Usually, images, there's a vast number of optimizations. Usually, you can do. People don't tend to look at that for some reason, and it's a very obvious one. Next is moving large assets that are below the fold into loading asynchronously. So you scroll down and it loads. So it's not actually part of the onload of the page. A lot of people quite often have long, rich content below the fold, so that's certainly something worth looking at. And then also third-party tags. Now, I've very obliquely mentioned that, but it really depends. If your third-party tags have got out of control, they can absolutely cripple the performance of your site and cause unexpected and weird performance on different devices, etc. As well as like that person who had Google Analytics flicking over and over. You can get some very weird things with third parties going on. With that, it's more of a matter of actually understanding why you've got all these different tags in there. The challenge seems to be linking it to somebody who owns it and has a business case for having it on the site, and just removing it if it's not actually doing anything. Sometimes you can make those asynchronous depending on the tag, but a lot of them unfortunately you can't. But it's just a matter of keeping tracking them and making sure that people aren't just shoving them on there and then just never removing them, because they can cause all sorts of problems.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, James. And just appreciate, conscious of everyone's time, we did say we'd try and finish about 1:45, so we'll take just the last question from Roger, which is just on. Roger was just asking about benchmarking, James. What should he use to sort of compare his site against? I think a really interesting question there.
What should he compare? I mean, benchmarking against competitors, was that, or was that what metrics?
Just how do they benchmark the site? What should he aim for?
What should he aim for in terms of benchmarking it beforehand?
Yeah, for performance. Yeah, how would we advise someone was sort of recommended as good? What would good performance look like?
Yeah, so I mean, good performance looks like, as I say, it's a vague. It depends. Really, what you need to do is understand what your competitor's performance is. How conversion is driven by slow performance on your site. Do have people got a competitor they can go to? For instance, certainly some of the people we work with, very unique, and actually, they compromise performance for having a rich experience. So they'll have much heavier pages, much slower loading, because people can't go elsewhere to buy what they provide. They're very unique products that they provide. So really, it depends. It's a matter of understanding your business and understanding how performance impacts it. But then also, so make sure you've got in place a set of synthetic monitoring, real user monitoring to understand whether people are getting, extreme poor performance. Even an example of that person when they've got a very rich site, if they're getting people getting ridiculous load times, and that's going to annoy some very high value customers. So they need to make sure there's a consistent performance, that everybody ideally gets the same performance, not ridiculously bad. And basically, doing a tool review, looking at what you're actually using in terms of monitoring your back end, monitoring your front end. Let's say we could have a whole webinar about APM and application performance monitoring tools and what works and what doesn't work. Certainly with some of the things we've mentioned about actually tagging a basket value onto your sessions and real user monitoring. Some tools can do that, some tools can't do that. But again, so it's worth doing some research and tool selection into what works best for your website and your technology, really. Unfortunately, it's not an easy question to answer, which is why we do a lot of consultancy in that area.
All right, thanks a lot, James. But I think the core there really is understanding how you kind of sit against competitors, and also understanding what performance looks like to you, i.e. there's no point optimizing to an extreme if it isn't going to make you sort of revenue, isn't going to improve the customer journeys enough to make that revenue increase. Yeah, no, I mean, it's always nice to look at Amazon and see how ridiculously fast they are, or some of the people like FT obviously invest a lot of time in their performance, but really you use those as benchmarks, maybe an aspirational target if you really want to be the fastest, but the reality is it's probably not going to be worth your while to invest that amount of time and money in performance. It's really got to give you a benefit back for you to invest the time in it. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so look, that's drawn things to the end of the session. If anyone does have any more questions, please feel free to take them offline, send them over to us. Just like to thank you all for joining us. Hope you found the insight useful. If you do, as we said, want to understand where your sort of website, where your company sits, in line with the rest of the sort of retailers we monitor, do get in touch. We will be able to show you that, give you that insight. And again, if anyone does want sort of to keep up to date what's going on, we are going to be doing a further website on how to prepare your website at a peak, and we'll be doing some stuff with customers as well to show you, exactly what customers have done in the run up to these big events. So yeah, I'd just like to take this time to thank you all for joining us. Thanks, James, for your time today.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
And hope you all have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you, everyone.